Good morning, Dan and Amy. Tom Petty bumper music all morning, remembering his great artistic work. Passed away yesterday at the age of 66.
I like this song, but I don't know what it's called.
I still like It Won't Back Down better, but it's all right.
What's the name of this song?
Last Dance with Mary Jane.
Oh, yeah, The Last Dance with Mary Jane.
Yeah, I think he's talking about marijuana. So, hey, if you kids out there.
420.
And my co-host.
420.
Don't do drugs. Nancy Pelosi, we were just talking about that CBS lawyer who got ash canned for her intemperate tweet, and we talked about Hillary Clinton's intemperate tweet, and now we're getting the usual rhetoric from the other intemperate Democrats, starting with the House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, who sent a letter to Speaker Ryan saying that Congress, quote, has a moral duty, unquote, to address what she called an epidemic of gun violence. And, of course, there's the way you address gun violence is have a committee. That's the politician's answer for everything. Yeah. Okay. We need a blue ribbon panel.
Well, we have gun
Commission
laws.
a study.
We have gun laws on the books. Just that a lot of people don't follow them, Dan.
Well, the other thing about Nancy Pelosi, as one of our callers was insinuating before, I mean, the Sandy Hook happened in 2012, so it wasn't while Democrats had control of both chambers, but certainly the issue of people committing crimes, even massacres with guns, is not a new one. So when the Democrats had the White House in control of both chambers at the outset of President Obama's tenure, well, why didn't they move on this issue if it's a moral duty that Nancy Pelosi suggests it is?
And besides the 42 guns that they found in his hotel room and at his house, he also had a car full of fertilizer, the same kind that was used in the Oklahoma City bombing.
For more on this topic and others, we're pleased to be joined by Congressman Peter Roskam, of course, representative of the 6th Congressional District in Illinois, Western Burbs. Peter, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's good to be with you guys. Thanks for having me on today.
So what about Pelosi's moral duty call? Will you salute?
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi just doesn't disappoint in these situations. And to your point, it really is worth bearing repeating. That is, the Democratic Party controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. And the only thing they basically did was screw up the economy and screw up health care. And they could have done a lot of other things to move forward with this agenda. She knows exactly, the level of manipulation of this sort of argument. And it's basically, it's a false claim. And it's an insincere argument at that. So I think that a lot of folks look at this and say, look, there's some real issues that need to be dealt with. That is on the mental health side of things in particular, always enforcing more as it relates to the laws that are on the books. But now is not the time for basically bumper sticker jargon, and that's exactly what she's falling into.
Now, President Trump, he spoke yesterday to the nation. He looked like an effective leader, is compassionate. But one thing I noticed yesterday, he did not tweet at all. And I thought that was very respectful of the victims and their family members. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, from my point of view, I've said this time and again, the less presidential tweeting, the better off we're going to be. So I think to the extent that he laid off it, it's a good thing. And I don't know if it's going to be a foreshadowing of things to come, but I agree with you, Amy, that it was a respectful and deferential move.
Turning to the central legislative issue being bandied about on the Hill is tax reform. And you bubbled up to the surface last week. I mean, you're on Ways and Means, so you're an instrumental part of this discussion regardless. But specifically on one of the central ways in the proposal to, quote unquote, pay for it, which I hate describing that way, so I need to stop. But the revenue pieces of it would be to eliminate the deduction for state and local taxes. Of course, Illinois, like California and New York, in fact, the highest state in the nation when it comes to combined state and local tax burden. So you seem to balk at that. But the question would be, well, why should the rest of the country pay for the sins of Illinois Pauls and New York Pauls and California Pauls?
So you got to look at this in the totality of the whole situation. So what I've asked my colleagues from high-tax states to do, and that is to say, look at the entire tax package that is presented, and what we're trying to do is make sure that we're bringing real tax relief to folks who need it. And so that's what's really driving it. The question, Dan, that you're posing is there's two components to the question. One is a tax benefit at high tax states. But the other question that's related to that is, there's states like Illinois send a tremendous amount of money to the federal government. So here's what we've got to do. We've got to make sure that tax reform is not simply a redistribution of a tax burden where my constituents would end up paying more. That's not anything that I'm going to be complicit in. But by the same time, a recognition that, look, this is not working where we are right now. So you can imagine, trying to work with representatives, Republicans in particular, from high tax states, trying to figure out what's a reasonable approach moving forward, because we've inherited a tax system that lets high taxpayers or taxpayers from high tax states deduct the cost of their big government. So we need to be moving in a different direction. But we got to make sure that people on the journey out of that aren't just whipsawed by seeing their taxes increased. I think we can do it, and I know I've had some incredibly constructive discussions with people, particularly over the past couple of weeks, as this issue has come to the fore. But by the same token, it will be this issue, then it will be another issue and another issue. Here's the point: we can't stay where we are. We've got to update this tax code, and I think we've got the political wind at our back, ironically, based in part of the miserable experience on health care. I think a lot of members of Congress are pretty sobered by the health care debate and realize now is the time, not to, no pun intended, nickel and dime this tax plan, but to really come around and lean forward on it and get it done.
Well, what about are there other matters on the table that would be on the revenue side and the simplification side, eliminating other deductions or perhaps lowering the cap on the mortgage deduction? What is being discussed in terms of getting the kind of the revenue neutral score that you need to get 50 votes in the Senate?
So on the revenue side and on the simplification side is this. The framework that the president proposed says, look, keep the mortgage interest deduction, keep the charitable deduction, refashion retirement savings, refashion and harmonize education savings, look at some other work incentives, and then pause and take a breath and double the standard deduction, and anything else that would go on to that tax form as a deduction has to fight its way back on. And this is a part of the discussion about state and local that we just had, but it's also part of the discussion about all these other things in the tax code that are deductions. And the thinking is clean it out and simplify it. Simply double the standard deduction and subsume a lot of these things.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, I said I like that it goes from 7 to 3, and also the estate tax would be eliminated. President Trump, though, desperately needs a legislative accomplishment. Do you honestly think that this is going to come through for him?
I do. I absolutely do. And here's why. I mentioned it a minute ago, but the experience, the House produced a package on health care. The Senate didn't. But people don't distinguish House from the Senate, and they just say, hey, you're Republicans in Congress, and you haven't performed at a level at which you promised. And they're right. That's a correct criticism. That has really chastened a lot of people and a lot of members of Congress, and their attitude is, we've got to produce this. And not just the politics of coming up with something good, but recognizing that it's very few times in history when you have an opportunity to have an impact on a policy that can have a generational impact. And all of the forces are coming together. Nobody's defending the status quo. Nobody likes the IRS. It's been 30 years. Hey, it's been since the Bears won the Super Bowl that this thing has been updated. And so there's this kind of crescendo feeling right now. And I think some level of clarity, not some level, some real clarity that's coming from the White House and the Treasury Department and the leadership on Capitol Hill to say, let's get this done. And I'll tell you this either gets done in 2017, in my opinion, or this will be the biggest fish that got away, and it would just be a shame. And I think most people recognize that and are pushing forward pretty hard.
All right. He is Congressman Peter Roskam, Republican from Illinois 6, out in the Western Burbs. Peter, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to